And the UN has launched a new appeal for aid funds for Syria, the biggest humanitarian appeal in history. It's asked its members to give $3.9 billion in new emergency funding. $1 billion of that is meant for humanitarian needs inside Syria. Another $2.9 billion is for refugees. A large chunk of that money will go directly to the governments of Lebanon and Jordan, where hundreds of thousands of refugees have fled. This new cash will be added to the $1.5 billion pledged earlier this year. Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor, James Bays, is at the UN in Geneva.
The amount of money they're asking for here is staggeringly vast. They know it's going to be a difficult task. Remember, it was only at the end of January that they asked for $1.5 billion. They've got so far about 80% of that, but this is so much more. It's going to be a hard task, and that was certainly a point made by both the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the UN's humanitarian chief when they sat down with me.
I think the world does feel for the people of Syria, is appalled by the brutality. There's no doubt that this is a lot of money, but we are going to go all out to raise it.
There are obviously some countries that have given a lot of money. There are others that haven't given so much. There also in the past have been countries that pledge money and then it takes a very long time for that money to appear. Is it time to get tough, to start naming and shaming?
I don't think it's time to start naming and shaming. It's time to make people understand that this is not only a matter of generosity. This is a matter for everybody of enlightened self-interest. Humanitarian aid is extremely important to address the suffering of people. And I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening to the Syrian people, and especially the children, and I mean, the stories we hear and the trauma we see.
Would you accept that over the last 2 years, both of you, that the UN's response on the humanitarian crisis has been behind the curve? You keep coming up with predictions. For example, the prediction on refugees. You predicted 1.1 million refugees by July. Right now, it's 1.6 million refugees. You're 500,000 out. Your predictions don't seem to ever keep up with the situation.
When we are doing these estimates, this is never a precise science, and also the situation on the ground is getting worse day by day. There's no doubt about that.
And I think that if there's something nobody predicted, it's the staggering escalation of the crisis. You mentioned 1.1 million. It was our forecast until June, made in November. But in December there were 3,000 refugees a day. In January there were 5,000. In February onwards, 7,000 to 8,000 a day. And this staggering escalation has forced all of us to really make a huge effort to be able to respond.
Is the deadlock at the Security Council not one of the main reasons why this conflict goes on, and you keep having to come up with more and more plans trying to deal with this humanitarian catastrophe?
I think we live in a world where power relations are no longer clear. And the international community has lost much of its capacity to prevent crises and to timely solve them. And what you see now in the Security Council is exactly that, is the inability of the international community to come together, to find a consensus and to act in order to make sure that a conflict like that is stopped.
Do you think the credibility and reputation of the United Nations have been damaged by what's happened in the last 2 years?
If you talk to people in countries in the European Union, in the United States and elsewhere, they all say the same thing. This has gone on for 2 years. Why has the United Nations not been able to stop it? So I do think that the credibility of the United Nations is on the line. The point that I make is that the United Nations is made up of 193 member states. It's not just people like me and Antonio Guterres. It is 193 member states. And crucially, we need those 15 countries on the Security Council, but particularly the permanent 5, to come together and to really work together to find a solution.
You can hear the frustration in their voices. They're doing all they can to try and deal with the devastating effects of the war in Syria. The real problem, though, is trying to stop that war. The only plan on the table, that US-Russian plan to bring both sides face to face here in Geneva. But for now, the violence continues and the Syrian opposition remain divided. They haven't even decided whether they'll attend this conference.